This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Score Sheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Good afternoon. Welcome to another Score Sheet podcast. We're taping this podcast here on Thursday, September 8th, which is kind of a busy time at the Score Sheet fantasy sport world, given that baseball is still got 3 more weeks of pennant races left. The first NFL regular season game is tonight. And we're actually, even though it's about 95 degrees outside, setting up fantasy hockey leagues because the NHL season starts in just 4 weeks. So it's kind of an exciting time. So I think I'll today briefly touch on all 3 sports. As far as baseball, the trading deadline in Score Sheet was a week ago, so roster moves as far as trades are done. However, there are 3 more weeks left in the season, and as I'm sure Met fans will remember from their epic collapse of 2 or 3 years ago when they blew something like a 7-game lead with 2 weeks to go, the standings can make pretty dramatic changes in baseball. And while I don't think my Giants will be able to make up their 7-game deficit to Arizona, given that they can't score more than 1 run a game, in Score Sheet, 6 or 7 games just is not insurmountable. Some teams have players that have been shut down for the year, and baseball is just one of those games where the first place team goes 1-5 and you go 5-1. You've made up 4 games in 1 week without either one of you having a truly remarkable week, bad or good. So even though the trading deadline is passed, what I think a lot of Score Sheet veterans have found is that making lineup changes the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season is still a fairly crucial thing, especially given that subs and rookie call-ups and all that might be sitting on your farm system or your bench might be better off in your starting lineup. Another thing you might look at is matchups. You know, if you got a pitcher that's getting to pitch against, say, Minnesota in the next couple of weeks, you might want to get him in your rotation. You know, there are teams like Minnesota that are out of the race that are just auditioning a large number of young players. And I think that pitching against Minnesota, you know, would probably bump your pitcher's ERA a couple points to the good. So don't just sit back and, you know, with the online lineup card, it's pretty easy just to move a couple guys into your rotation or a couple guys off your starting lineup and a couple bench players up. So if you're still even 6 or 7 games out, 8 games out, go ahead and make a lineup change. See if you can't give it that one last shot. Let's see, hockey, like I said, we're setting up hockey fantasy sports leagues right now. We're starting both single season leagues and also a couple new continuing leagues. So if you'd like to give fantasy hockey a shot this year, there's an online order form on the web, or you could shoot us an email or give us a call, and we'd be happy to sign you up for a hockey team. And then football. It is, as I said, opening night tonight, so teams are turning in their first depth charts of the year, and then obviously, like all of our sports, before you can turn around, it'll be the 2nd or 3rd week of the season. It's amazing how fast time flies when a sports season starts. In football, we do have a free agent draft every week. So when you turn in your depth chart, the 3rd section on the depth chart form is a free agent wanted window where you can list a few players and then you'll get one of those players each week. So don't forget to fill that out. If you don't fill that out, you'll get the player that's undrafted in your league that has the most points through the previous week. Well, in week 1, the previous week would be last year. So, you know, if you leave that section blank, you're not going to automatically get whoever scored the most points in week 1. Or else everybody would leave it blank. You're just going to get whoever had the most points last year that is still undrafted in your league. Then we did make a rule change this year. Teams that do not turn in a new depth chart / free agent list will still get a free agent, but they will draft after all the teams that did take the time to send in a new chart. So it will help you just to take a minute and go to your depth chart, maybe move a couple guys around your free agent list, add a couple new guys, and send in a new chart. Also in your free agent list, if you just want to get whoever had the most points from a certain position through games of a week ago, you can put a position down. You put RB, short, which is short for running back, or QB, or DL, or LB. And if you put a position down, then that tells the program to give you whoever has the most points at that position through games of a week ago. So if you do that, say in week 6, whoever has the most points at that position through the first 5 weeks of the season and is still undrafted will be yours when it comes your turn to pick. Another thing you can do on the web is turn in trades. Some people still like to email us trades or even call them in. The benefit of using the web form is that way everybody in your league, and especially the guy you made the trade with, can see that you are in fact reporting the trade and confirming it. So there's a link called Trade Report on your homepage for your league. Click on that to report a trade, and it'll show up right away for everyone to see. And then as soon as both owners report it, the dynamic rosters on your league webpage will be updated. As I mentioned earlier, in all fantasy sports, but I think especially football, it's amazing how fast the season gets going. And I say especially football because football is the shortest season. There's only 14 regular season weeks. And if you tell yourself, well, I have a hole at wide receiver, but my guys will come back, or the guy that's really stinking up the joint, he'll finally get better. You tell yourself that for 2 or 3 weeks, and suddenly you're a third of the way through the season. So I think, panicking is not a good thing. Just because your number one draft pick has a bad week doesn't mean you necessarily have to make a trade for a guy at that position. But don't wait too long to start thinking about trades, because as I said, 3 weeks into the season, you've already done 20% of the season. And then, of course, there's the big news today of Peyton Manning. Had another neck surgery today. I think the absolute best anyone can hope for is that he'll be back in 2 months. And I think realistically, missing the whole season has to be considered. It's certainly a drag to lose your first-round pick and your starting quarterback before the season even starts. On the other hand, it seems like every year in football, in exhibition games or training camp, there's always a few big-name injuries. In fact, until Manning's injury or surgery was announced today, I was just thinking how few big-name injuries there have been, other than the New York Giants' entire defense, which doesn't have quite as much a fantasy impact as it does for the Giants' real-life chances. Really, the injuries just haven't been as bad as usual, maybe because teams were playing it a little safer given the lockout. Obviously, if you're a Manning owner, none of that really helps you much. You're still pretty unhappy. But I think it just goes to show that football is also a sport where depth really matters. In baseball, you can hope that your starting third baseman or shortstop makes it through most of the year. Though actually this year, third base, that didn't work well. But in football, it's really not unusual for a month into the season to see half of the first-round picks in a league be either greatly underperforming or have a serious injury. So picking up free agents, making trades for whenever you get thin at a position, I think doing those things that add to the depth of your team is really a crucial thing in football. And then, of course, there are the bye weeks. So if you didn't pay much attention to bye weeks while you're drafting, you ought to take a look at your roster now before they suddenly start appearing in a couple weeks. If you look down, and like I discovered in my local league, which had a couple beers being drank, I've got 4 defensive backs. Well, that's well and good. 3 of them are off on week 5. That's not so good. So take a look so that you're suddenly not 2 days before the week 5 deadline realizing you've got to trade for a linebacker or a defensive back. And make sure when you're drafting free agents, you draft guys that don't have buys the same week as the guys you already have. I hope you're as happy about all the sports going on right now as I am, and we'll talk to you soon.